Pure mathematics exists in a state of absolute perfection. It describes flawless geometric forms and infinite sequences that stretch endlessly, without a single physical aberration. But the organ we use to comprehend this perfection is entirely physical. It is a wet, messy network of cells, constrained by biological limits and fueled by a finite supply of glucose. This presents a paradox. How does a biological organ, one that spent millions of years evolving to track predators and forage for berries, possess the capacity to calculate infinity? For decades, the standard assumption was that mathematics is strictly a cultural invention. The logic went that math is essentially a learned language, like an alphabet or grammatical rules, imprinted onto a blank brain through schooling and environmental exposure. But to understand the true origin of numerical thought, we have to look past the classroom. We must examine the hardwired, pre-existing biological circuits we are actually born with. If math were entirely dependent on our language centers, mathematical ability should scale directly with a person's vocabulary and general intelligence. Clinical neurology paints a completely different picture. There are documented cases of patients with severe aphasia, people who have entirely lost their capacity to produce or comprehend speech, who can still execute complex algebraic equations flawlessly. Other neurological injuries produce the exact inverse effect. Patients retain perfect grammar, vocabulary, and logical reasoning, yet completely lose the ability to comprehend a concept as simple as the number 4. In neuroscience, this is known as a double dissociation. It proves definitively that numerical cognition and language operate on completely separate neural tracks. This separation points to the existence of a domain-specific module. This is a specialized biological circuit dedicated exclusively to executing one specific type of task. Humans possess an isolated, physically distinct network in the brain built explicitly to process numbers, operating completely independent of our ability to speak or read. This dedicated hardware is called the Approximate Number System, or ANS. It forms the biological bedrock of numerical perception, and it is a circuit we share with primates, birds, and even fish. The ANS does not count individual items one by one. Instead, it instantly estimates magnitude based on ratios. We can test this right now. If I flash 2 sets of dots on screen for half a second, you know immediately that the red side has more. You didn't count them. Your brain instantly recognized the wide 1-to-2 ratio. This biological mechanism is governed by Weber's law. As quantities increase in size, the ratio between them must also scale proportionately to tell them apart. When we tighten that ratio, say 14 against 15, the system breaks down. The difference is too small for our biological hardware to parse instantly. Our primal numerical hardware is built entirely for these fuzzy, ratio-based approximations. On its own, it is incapable of processing exact, rigid mathematics. To understand how these approximations happen, we have to move from behavioral psychology to physical neuroscience and pinpoint where this system actually lives. Our number sense is located deep in the parietal lobe, specifically within a fold called the intraparietal sulcus, found in both hemispheres of the brain. This neuronal tuning curve shows how individual neurons in the intraparietal sulcus fire electrical impulses in response to specific quantities. Isolated, a specific number 3 neuron reaches its maximum firing rate precisely when exposed to 3 items. But notice the curve's shape. The signal doesn't stop abruptly. It fires weakly for 2 and 4, and drops off at 1 and 5. This tapering effect creates the biological fuzziness of our estimates. This electrical firing pattern happens instantaneously, entirely before conscious thought or cultural counting techniques can engage. Humans literally possess a physical sensory organ for perceiving magnitude, in exactly the same way we have retinas for perceiving light. Here we arrive back at the conflict. The intraparietal sulcus is designed for fuzzy approximation, but advanced calculus and algebra require exact, rigid symbols. The explanation for how we bridge this gap lies in the neuronal recycling hypothesis. Evolution is slow, but culture is fast. When humanity invented Arabic numerals, we didn't grow a new brain area to process them. Instead, these cultural symbols co-opted or recycled ancient visual and spatial networks already present in the brain. When you look at the number 7, your brain first processes it as a pure shape in the visual cortex. To give that shape numerical meaning, the cortex sends a signal directly along a neural pathway into the intraparietal sulcus. This cultural symbol physically hijacks the biological hardware. The rigid visual shape of a 7 locks on to the peak of the neuron's fuzzy tuning curve, forcing an exact definition onto an approximate system. Advanced algebra functions as a cultural hack, forcing ancient spatial networks to execute exact logic. Because this system is cobbled together from recycled parts, pushing it to handle high cognitive loads like long division reveals its structural limits. This network map demonstrates those limits. The intraparietal sulcus cannot process complex operations alone. It must recruit entirely different brain regions, relying on language centers to recall multiplication tables and the prefrontal cortex for working memory. We can observe the strict dependency of this network in a developmental condition known as dyscalculia. In dyscalculic patients, the central hardware of the intraparietal sulcus is often underactivated or structurally atypical. When that primary node fails to process magnitude, the entire interconnected network of memory and language trying to solve the equation collapses. Without a functioning biological magnitude sensor to ground the data, the cultural symbols of mathematics revert to being completely meaningless shapes. No matter how culturally advanced mathematics becomes, it remains permanently tethered to the physical integrity of a tiny fold in the parietal lobe. We start with single neurons firing in response to volume, scale up to the approximate number system shared with other species, and finally arrive at the cultural recycling of visual symbols. The infinite abstractions of geometry remain anchored to the finite reality of our biological wetware. Repurposing primate hardware to handle these abstractions reveals the brain's capacity for structural reorganization, allowing an organic network to perceive flawless geometry. The structure of mathematics reflects the specific physical constraints of the brain's circuitry. By looking outward at the infinite, abstract rules of numbers, we are actually mapping the internal biological architecture of the human mind.